Frontline is a presentation of the Documentary Consortium.
Tonight on Frontline,
You can imagine that after 1,763 days in chains,
the untold story of hostage Terry Waite and Colonel Oliver North.
The North was, I'm sure, delighted to have discovered Terry Waite.
In the mid-1980s, as Oliver North pursued his secret arms for hostage deals in the Middle East, he was using the humanitarian missions of Terry Waite as a decoy.
He provided cover for North's operation because it made it much easier for North to conceal what was really going on.
As far as the disclosures about arms, I mean, I want to say quite clearly and quite categorically, I knew nothing about that.
Waite was duped. Waite was used by the U.S. government in its effort to achieve freedom for the hostages.
Tonight, the secret story of Terry Waite.
With funding provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is Frontline, a special report.
There is Mr. Waite, back home after nearly 5 years away from Britain.
Terry Waite was no ordinary hostage. He returned to Britain last week a national hero, the man who had sacrificed his own freedom in an idealistic quest to liberate American hostages in Lebanon. But Terry Waite has stepped out of captivity into controversy, the joy of his sudden release colored by new revelations about his connections to Oliver North and the Iran-Contra scandal.
Terrible day for his return, still streaming rain at Lynham.
During the past 4 years, BBC reporter Gavin Hewitt investigated the secrets of Terry Waite's relationship with Oliver North and the mystery of his capture. Why had the man who tried to free hostages become a hostage himself?
Terry Waite worked for the Church of England out of Lambeth Palace in London.
And for Terry's family.
For nearly 5 years, Robert Runcie, the Archbishop of Canterbury, at the time of Terry Waite's capture, has agonized over why his personal envoy was taken. Had he been undone by his dealings with officials in Washington? Terry Waite had joined Lambeth Palace in 1980. His job was to advise the Archbishop on the Anglican Communion overseas. He was ambitious for the Church to play a more active role in the world's trouble spots.
Terry is a very, very complicated man. He likes adventure. He likes to be, as it were, where the action is. And he has the gifts to do it. But I think more deeply than that, Terry is a humanitarian. And I think the thing that he talked about again and again and again was the belief that there was a possibility for those who believed in God to transverse cultures and differences, and that he could do something.
It was Terry Waite's reputation for dealing with militant Islamic regimes that led to his being involved in trying to free American hostages held in Lebanon. In 1981, he had helped secure the release of 3 British missionaries from Iran. 4 years later, he met with Colonel Gaddafi in his Bedouin tent. Although it was never clear what had finally influenced the Libyan leader, 4 Britons held in Tripoli were freed.
And I would like you to please receive this small Christmas gift. Thank you. Thank you.
In 1984, while he was still talking to the Libyans, Terry Waite received an appeal from the family of Benjamin Weir, an American Presbyterian minister held hostage in Beirut. Lebanon was in turmoil. During a decade of street warfare, the influence of one community had grown, the Shiite Muslims. The Shiites had been inspired by the religious fervor of Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran. a group of Shiites who opposed Western involvement in Lebanon began taking Americans hostage. Although they sometimes took orders from Iran, they had demands of their own. In dealing with these shadowy groups from Beirut, the United States was powerless. In 1985, the mood here in Washington and throughout the United States was one of anger and frustration. America held hostage was like a reoccurring nightmare. In response, the Reagan administration was to abandon normal diplomacy in favor of secret deals and covert operations. Terry Waite was to talk to representatives of the US government, but some of those officials were to make up their own rules, thereby exposing him to risk and eventual captivity. It was through contacts in the Episcopal Church in the United States that Terry Waite was introduced to officials in Washington handling the hostage crisis. The Episcopal Church is part of the Anglican Communion and, like the Church of England, embraces High Anglicanism and born-again fundamentalism. In taking up the case of the American hostage, Benjamin Weir, Terry Waite needed to be briefed by American government officials. It so happened that many of the senior figures in the Reagan administration were Episcopalians. The church contacted George Bush, the then vice president and a lifelong Episcopalian. He suggested a meeting with his own staff. On May the 9th, 1985, Terry Waite, accompanied by church officials, met Donald Gregg, National Security Advisor to George Bush and a member of the CIA for 17 years. He said the man they should deal with was Colonel Oliver North in the White House. At the time, Oliver North was a little-known official on the National Security Council staff with responsibility for counterterrorism. He had become President Reagan's point man on the hostage crisis. Unknown to Waite and the families, he was at this time also deeply involved in secretly supplying the Contras in Nicaragua. On May the 18th, 1985, Colonel North came to New York, to the Manhattan apartment of the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. There he was introduced to Terry Waite. It was the first of nearly 20 meetings, many more than has been reported. There were also countless phone conversations between the two men. During the next 18 months, Colonel North was to be Terry Waite's main contact within the Reagan administration.
Ollie North had had a good religious upbringing himself, had been an altar boy, and was very accustomed to speaking in the language that was well understood by people of the church. And so they were able to communicate very easily on this grounds.
The link between Colonel North and Terry Waite was a reserve naval chaplain and Episcopalian priest, Samir Habibi. Palestinian by origin, with extensive contacts in the Middle East, he had worked with Terry Waite on previous missions. As director of the church's relief fund, he had met with people in the administration. With a string of useful connections, Canon Habibi served as Terry Waite's closest advisor in the United States and had an intimate knowledge of his activities. He accompanied him to many of his meetings with senior administration officials, including Oliver North.
The relationship with Ollie was unique. We felt close to him because, among other things, he belonged to our church. I had an excellent rapport with Colonel North. It's kind of an instinctive thing. He and I had similar paths in previous duties. I had served as a chaplain attached to the forces in Vietnam and been in some of the areas that Colonel North had served in. So there was a commonality of concern about certain values that we felt existed. I remember him saying, we need to learn to trust each other. And trust comes with faith. And to have that kind of depth of faith, one needs to know the other person better.
In 1985, there was great uncertainty within the Reagan administration as to what the kidnappers in Beirut really wanted. Although they were partly financed and controlled by Iran, they had one important demand of their own. Some of their relatives had been imprisoned in Kuwait, and they wanted them released. 17 men had been convicted of carrying out bombing attacks on embassies in Kuwait City. 3 of them were Lebanese, related to influential Shiite families in Beirut. One of the prisoners was under sentence of death. The other 2 faced life imprisonment. The Kuwaitis at the time were taking a tough line on terrorism. During the summer of 1985, Terry.Waite examined a number of ideas relating to the Kuwaiti prisoners. He made some exploratory contacts. However, before he set foot in Beirut, the Reagan administration, unknown to him, was implementing a secret hostage plan involving Iran. In August and September, America's ally Israel sold a total of 508 TOW anti-tank missiles to Iran. The deliveries were made with the knowledge of senior U.S. officials, including President Reagan, despite his official ban on arms sales to Iran. Colonel North was told to prepare plans to receive the hostages. Within 2 days of the missile shipment, Presbyterian minister Benjamin Weir was released. Officials were convinced others would also be freed. 4 days after Benjamin Weir had given his first news conference, Terry.Waite unexpectedly flew to New York. While not claiming credit for the release, he identified himself with it.
I further established, through an intermediary, a contact with the captors in Beirut, and have been in communication with them on a regular basis for the past months.
While Terry.Waite was working through his contacts, others had helped arrange the missile shipment to Iran. One of those was Michael Ledeen, a consultant to the National Security Council. He saw the shipment as a way of improving relations with Iran, and has no doubt that it also secured the release of Benjamin Weir.
The release of Benjamin Weir was achieved when the government of Iran instructed the Hezbollahis in Lebanon to release him. And I think it was purely and simply an initiative by the Iranian government as part of the reciprocal test that was going on with the American government at the time. And I don't think anybody else or any other initiative played a role in the release of Weir.
What do you think Terry.Waite's role was in the release of Benjamin Weir?
I don't think that Terry.Waite had any substantive role in the release of Weir. I think Weir was released by the government of Iran as a result of the agreement it had reached with the government of the United States, pure and simple.
How do you think it came about that Terry.Waite identified himself with the release of Benjamin Weir 4 or 5 days after he had been freed?
I think that North encouraged Waite to receive Benjamin Weir when he came out, and I think that North may well have convinced Waite at that time that he was at least partially responsible for the release of Weir, but I don't think he was.
References to Oliver North's meetings and contacts with Terry.Waite are found in North's notebooks. Although sections were classified to protect Waite in captivity, we've seen some of the originals. There are frequent references to the Anglican envoy and his colleagues. They reveal that North quickly saw immense potential in a man whose humanitarian work had gained him access to groups beyond the reach of American officials. In November 1985, Terry.Waite prepared to leave for Beirut, the remaining hostages having sent a letter appealing for his help. Waite had already boarded his Middle East Airlines flight when Colonel North and a State Department official flew in to see him. Displaying his White House credentials, North persuaded airport officials to arrange a meeting with Terry.Waite on the tarmac. North showed him a photograph of a man, seen here in the middle of the picture with a gun, who American intelligence believed was Imad Mugnir, one of the Islamic militants behind the hostage-taking. Privately, North was interested in any information he might glean from Terry.Waite's visit to Beirut. Terry.Waite arrived in Lebanon to a fanfare of publicity, a high profile which he hoped would entice the kidnappers to deal with him. After 4 days, he had achieved what no other intermediary had done, direct contact with the captors.
During the past days, I've had lengthy contacts. There is absolutely no doubt at all that I have got through to the right people and that a measure of trust has been established.
You seem to be saying that you have had a face-to-face meeting with somebody. Do we understand that?
Yes, I've had lengthy contact.
Terry.Waite's conduit to the captors was a Shiite doctor, Adnan Mroueh. Terry.Waite inquired whether they were after money. The captors appeared offended at the suggestion and reaffirmed that their relatives imprisoned in Kuwait must be freed. On November the 18th, Terry.Waite flew back to London, where he was met by Colonel North at the Heathrow Penta Hotel. North was excited. He believed the visit had gained them invaluable intelligence on the location of the hostages, mainly through the tests which Terry.Waite had innocently devised for the captors to prove they were genuine.
He was carrying with him a Polaroid camera and a newspaper. And he gave the camera to the kidnappers, and they came back 20, 30 minutes later with photos of 4 hostages.
Considering that was the first direct contact with the kidnappers, how was that news received?
This established that at that point, the hostages, or this group of hostages, was in West Beirut. Previously, we had had reports that they were in the Bekaa Valley, in South Beirut, and elsewhere. This was the first report that they were, in fact, in West Beirut.
In London, North and the other officials regarded the trip as a breakthrough. In the hotel room, North laid out maps and aerial photographs and asked Terry.Waite to point out where he had been. North then asked him whether on future missions he'd carry a tracking device. He produced from his bag a belt with a locating device in the buckle. It was presented to Terry.Waite as a way of protecting him, but for the Americans, it would also have assisted in locating the hostages if the Anglican envoy met with them. Terry.Waite accepted the device from North, believing it could help in the treacherous streets of Beirut. It's not clear whether he ever used it. Oliver North, who has denied giving Terry.Waite any device, has not, however, commented on this particular meeting in 1985. Eugene Douglas was President Reagan's ambassador-at-large for refugees. He was a close friend of both Terry.Waite and Oliver North and knew of the London meeting.
Come on, Hiroki.
He confirms that North did offer Terry.Waite a device for his protection that day.
The danger in the Middle East had risen so alarmingly, and the concern for his safety and the anxiety that there would be yet another hostage led North, I understand, to propose that Terry take with him some means of being located. You put them on children if they're going into Harrods for the Christmas period. If you lose your child in Harrods, you can find him by an electronic device. And there was a hope that if Terry were somehow endangered and went off the track, if someone moved him to an area that he shouldn't be, even if it was only temporary, there might be some way of knowing where he would be. I think that was the idea, not that that Terry would become a roving, radio station like floats around or used to float around in the English Channel.
But would not Terry.Waite's wearing of a tracking device have also helped locate the hostages?
Assuming that he was with the hostages, it would have. But in that world, in that transition world between overt and covert, you always weigh the risks.
But that was one of the motives, wasn't it? On behalf of some people.
Well, it is reasonable to assume that it was one of the peripheral or marginal, or that's also a good result if we know where Terry is, that if he gets to the hostages, that we might have some idea of where they are, too.
Former American hostage Father Jenko had reason to know how dangerous such a plan was.
At this point, I had been living in a clothes closet for about a month and a half. And one day they opened the clothes closet and he said, open your mouth, which I did. And you're blindfolded, so you don't exactly know what they're going to be doing. And he said, what are those? And I said, those are fillings. And he said, no, they're not. He says, those are some type of communication that you give back to your government. And I says, they are not. You can't be serious. And I says, they are fillings. And they said, we'll give you half an hour to take them out. And they thought there was some kind of a transistor or something, which was frightening because you don't know if they're going to really come in and do that. So you sit in the utter darkness, for hours waiting for that. And when they did pull a tooth, I fainted, because I was still tying into that kind of a scene.
Terry.Waite was keeping dangerous company. In late November, the Americans approved another secret plan for Israel to sell 100 Hawk surface-to-air missiles to Iran. They expected 4 hostages to be released, and Colonel North urged Terry.Waite to return to Beirut at once. He arrived back in Lebanon with a radio linking him to the US Embassy, but the arms shipment ran into difficulty and no hostage was freed. Waite met with intermediaries, but all he had new to tell them was that having consulted, he was prepared to take up the cases of the Kuwaiti prisoners. But before he could leave Beirut, he was caught up in renewed fighting. While gunmen fought in the streets, Terry.Waite was displaying coolness and some humor.
What are you planning to do now?
Take cover, I think.
Everybody else okay in there?
Everybody's fine. They're on the phone.
Terry.Waite flew from Beirut to New York City, where he briefed Colonel North. He was carrying letters from the captors' families for their relatives in Kuwait. Whether he realized it or not, Terry.Waite was now walking a fine line between talking to the Americans and working for them. That evening, at the bishop's apartment in Manhattan, the letters, which were unsealed and in Arabic, were opened and read in the presence of Colonel North. They were personal letters and contained no information about the American hostages. In early December, Terry.Waite went to Geneva and held 2 informal meetings with Kuwaiti officials, thereby fulfilling his pledge to the captors in Beirut. Elaborate precautions were taken to keep the meetings secret. Terry.Waite had to leave the hotel by a back entrance. For 10 days earlier, the Kuwaitis had denied Terry.Waite a visa, refusing to acknowledge any connection between the hostages and the Kuwaiti prisoners. It was only a short drive to the Kuwaiti embassy. The Kuwaitis made no concessions, agreeing only to improved contact between the prisoners and their families. In December, Terry.Waite returned to Beirut to report back to the captors. He knew that as a result of his Geneva meetings, he had little new to offer, but he thought it was just possible that, being Christmas, the captors might be prepared to make a gesture. It was not to be.
The negotiations remain at a critical stage. As I have frequently said, they're difficult, dangerous, and require continued and sustained effort.
Terry.Waite went home to London, the mission a failure. Beneath the smiles, he had in fact been given 24 hours to leave Beirut and warned not to return unless he had something more concrete to offer. It was the beginning of the captors' doubts about Terry.Waite.
It was after December that we really did not hear much about Terry's activity. So we would ask our guards, where's Terry Waite in all this? Because they took the radio away from us in the end of January, I think it was. So we had no news at all. So we would ask, is Terry Waite still? And they would never give us any information whether or not he was or was not. But there was a certain feeling, I think we all picked up from them, that they moved back from Terry. And they didn't trust Terry.
In Washington, Colonel North concluded that Terry Waite's efforts had temporarily reached a dead end, but North was turning again to selling arms to the Iranians. For that, he would continue to need Terry Waite as a cover for his operation, even though the Anglican envoy would continue to see his role as that of mediator. Other branches of the US government, including the CIA, were becoming interested in Waite's access to the captors. William Buckley, the CIA station chief in Lebanon, had been taken hostage, and the agency was desperate to free him. Stansfield Turner, former director of the CIA, says it was natural for the agency to look to Waite.
I think you use people like Terry Waite. You use almost anybody who has access and some reasonably good intention. You have to be very careful. I mean, you can trust a man like Terry Waite. Others you might try to employ in such circumstances have their own agendas, and you have to be cautious. Doesn't mean you wouldn't use any kind of a rogue if he could help you, if he could help get information or help get the release of those people. You just have to be judicious in how much you trust them and how much you let them twist your objectives, your agenda, to theirs.
But as director of the CIA, you would quite happily have used people like Terry Waite?
Yes.
In 1985, Bill Casey, the then CIA director, set up a group whose task was to locate the hostages. One of its purposes was to provide the relevant intelligence for launching a rescue mission. It intercepted telephone traffic coming out of Lebanon, and a satellite was repositioned to photograph streets in West Beirut. In April 1986, the task force produced a paper with a series of options. Among them were Waite, paying ransom, and using force. The Waite option remains classified, but there was another scheme which was discussed by members of the CIA and the National Security Council. It would have relied on exploiting Terry Waite's contacts in Lebanon. From sources in Washington, we've learned of one specific plan in which Terry Waite would have been used as a key element in a rescue mission. The idea, which was discussed by Oliver North and others, took shape in late 1985 and early 1986. Terry Waite would have been encouraged to return to Beirut and to persuade the kidnappers to grant him a pastoral meeting with all the hostages. His movements would have been tracked by a transmitting device which he'd have been wearing. As soon as it was confirmed that all the hostages were together, American special forces and their allies in the Lebanese capital would have moved in. Terry Waite, unwittingly, would have been used to set a trap. If he had managed to meet with the hostages and the kidnappers and was wearing a tracking device, it could have helped in the planning of a rescue mission.
Well, hypothetically, it could have. And it might have, but that wasn't the point of having Terry, presenting to Waite the opportunity of carrying with him a device for location.
But there was a contingency plan, wasn't there, for him to be used in that way?
There were discussions about many things. Would it be a formal contingency plan? No.
But it was an option which was discussed by members of the administration.
It was one of 500 topics that came onto a table during a discussion.
That atmosphere of being willing to consider anything extended to President Reagan in the White House. In May 1986, he authorized a mission to Tehran. Oliver North and Robert McFarlane, his former national security advisor, flew secretly to the Iranian capital. The trip was intended to end the hostage crisis. One of those on the plane was Howard Teicher of the National Security Council's staff.
The purpose of the trip was to deliver parts to Iran and simultaneously bring about the release of hostages being held in Beirut. This would have led to a high-level dialogue between the U.S. and Iranian government officials. Obviously, the transaction was not concluded, and the mission was a total failure.
Did Terry Waite ever know anything about that trip?
To the best of my knowledge, Waite had no knowledge whatsoever of what was going on in Tehran.
Although Terry Waite wasn't informed about the mission to Tehran, he did make an undisclosed trip to the Middle East, precisely at the moment North expected the hostages to be released. It wasn't, in fact, until 2 months later in July that a second hostage was freed. Father Jenko's release came only after Iran had been privately promised that more spare parts would be delivered.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.
Father Jenko, a Catholic priest with the Servite order, now conducts Mass in the heart of Wall Street. He is deeply grateful to Terry Waite for risking his life for people like himself. But since the revelations about the trading of arms for hostages, he is puzzled over the reasons for his release and Terry Waite's sudden arrival in Damascus.
Then that evening, Terry shows up, and he said he came in from, he was waiting for me in Jordan.
And what did he say?
Well, he said that he was waiting for me in Jordan, and it was an interesting thing because he said to me, "You believe that, don't you?" Well, at that point in my life, I would have believed anybody, but I just wondered why the question was even being asked. You know, we have asked him to come to help us. You know, why shouldn't I believe him? But it's a question that always bothered me.
Why did it bother you?
I don't know. It's just it was just the wrong question at the wrong time, I suppose.
Father Jenko's puzzlement refers to his arrival in Damascus, having just been freed in Lebanon. At the time, Terry Waite was in Jordan, but North was most anxious for him to be seen with the freed hostage, even though he had played no significant role in his release. He arranged Terry Waite's visa in his travel to Damascus.
Straight through here.
I am very delighted to see Terry Waite, who has followed this matter for so long. I have high hopes for the release of my 3 brothers and fellow prisoners and other hostages.
Thereafter, Terry Waite was in every picture. He escorted Father Jenko in meetings with United States officials, then later to Lambeth Palace, and afterwards to the Vatican.
So I thank you very much for you.
Terry Waite always said that it takes many levers to free a hostage, and that it's difficult to know which was the deciding factor. Involved in Father Jenko's release was Robert Oakley, the State Department's then head of counterterrorism.
I think it's pretty clear from subsequent revelations, as well as from what was going on at the time, that Terry's role was a supportive or secondary role. He was in direct contact occasionally with the captors, which was something that no one else had been able to do. And to what degree this direct contact facilitated the release of hostages is hard to say, but it obviously was not the dominant factor, because the dominant factor were the instructions coming from Tehran. The Iranians were getting things in exchange for the release of hostages, whether they were Americans or other nationalities. This was the dominant factor in the release, but Terry was there. It also was convenient in that people tended to focus their attention upon Terry Waite rather than upon other sorts of negotiations or dealings that were going on with respect to the release of the hostages.
North told me that the reason Terry Waite had been going to Lebanon and conducting discussions with Islamic Jihad was because North had asked him to. It became apparent that Waite served an unwitting cover role for the covert dialogue and operations that North was running behind the scenes as a way to distract people's attention from the real channel, which was North's channel to the Iranians.
In his office at Lambeth Palace, Terry Waite had few people to advise him on the potential hazards of his relationship with Oliver North. His inner circle consisted of Canon Habibi in the United States and other contacts passed to him by North. Lambeth Palace only knew the barest details about his activities. After he became a hostage himself, they had to reconstruct his diary from the stubs of airline tickets. In dealing with a man like Oliver North, no one in the church had any experience. How close was the relationship between Terry Waite and Oliver North?
I think in some ways it was close. That was more a meeting of two very strong personalities, two deeply committed people. And you have to understand how I mean that. That whatever you may think about Oliver North and what he did, the wisdom of what he did, there really should be no grounds for doubting that Oliver North thought he was doing the right thing. He was deeply committed to his country, to his cause, to the cause of freedom, and to the release of the hostages. That kind of intensity, that emotional intensity, that was one of Ollie North's most endearing characteristics, and remains so to this day, is also one of Terry Waite's most pronounced characteristics. He feels deeply about things and about people, and if he feels deeply, he feels it is his obligation to act within the realm of the world he's living in.
Hostage affairs were transforming Terry Waite into a personality, and that too concerned some of his friends. Indeed, those who met him were surprised at how he had come to view his own role.
Indeed, I once asked him, I said, what is it that you do, Terry? And he said, I am the Archbishop of Canterbury's Kissinger.
How did that strike you?
It was an extraordinary statement, I thought. It conjured up a man that had certainly no shortage of confidence in his own capabilities, in his own knowledge of world affairs, in his own ability to engage in extraordinarily difficult negotiations.
How well do you think Terry Waite understood the world in which he found himself operating?
Well, in the beginning, I think he understood it very well, altogether. As time went on, from 83, 84, 85, but certainly as the hostage crisis deepened, I think he found it very difficult to understand the layering of the public world of diplomacy, public relations propaganda. But I think he had great difficulty coming to grips with the compromises, if not the duplicity of the black world, of the covert world, that had come by that time to be the paramount world, at least in Beirut and much of the Middle East.
On August the 8th, 1986, Canon Habibi and his assistant went to Kennedy Airport to meet Oliver North, who was returning from Europe. The plane was late. When he arrived, the entire party crowded into Canon Habibi's Buick and dashed to LaGuardia. Colonel North needed to return to Washington at once, but discovered there were problems with the flights. So instead, they went to the nearby Marriott Hotel. North gave the impression of a man running out of time. He was carrying communications equipment in an attempt to keep track of his network. A new channel to the leadership in Iran was opening up, and he was secretly planning to continue trading in arms. While not mentioning this, he urged Terry Waite to renew his efforts on behalf of the prisoners in Kuwait. On October the 31st, 1986, another 500 TOW missiles were flown from Israel to Iran. Colonel North expected that at least 2 hostages would be freed. Terry Waite was once again expected to be the public face of the operation. According to one of North's chronologies, which remains classified, he asked that Terry Waite be in Beirut November the 2nd, just in case. Mr. Waite was contacted by NSC North and was assisted by Department of Defense U.S. military helicopters in his travels to Beirut. Terry Waite duly arrived in Cyprus. He phoned the news agency Associated Press and told them to expect developments. The press, alerted, saw him using American military helicopters between Cyprus and Beirut. Oliver North was also spotted at Cyprus airport, despite attempts to conceal himself. For the first time, correspondents began to question what was behind the release of the hostages and what exactly were Terry Waite's links to the Americans.
Terry Waite had flown in an American military helicopter on several occasions on what until that point had been secret missions to Lebanon. We may sit back and say, well, of course the Americans would help him without necessarily compromising him. But the fact is that if you know anything about the people in Islamic Jihad, the extremists, if you like, the Islamic radicals, the fundamentalists, call them what you will in Lebanon, then you would know that for Terry Waite to have even been seen near an American military helicopter as part of his mission would compromise him in their eyes. And there was evidence that he had flown on several occasions in that helicopter and indeed met Colonel North, and I think that compromised him totally.
Terry Waite returned from Beirut with one hostage, David Jacobson. But Waite hadn't met with the captors. Neither were there any negotiations. The man assigned to coordinate the release was Robert Dutton. He also was involved in resupplying the Contras in Central America. He saw Waite's role as handling public relations.
As it turned out, Terry was the front man. He was the gentleman that all the international press called. He wrote the statements that were released after they were reviewed by all the various parties to make sure that we were making sure that nothing in those releases would in any way harm or affect the situation as it was for the hostages that were already being held.
And you don't think he was uneasy at all at being a front man, do you?
No, I don't think he's very good at it. If he was uneasy, it certainly didn't show. I mean, I've spoken about him to other people, and as I saw him, he was as big as the world. I mean, he's a big man, and he talks big, and he's just a very wonderful man who took that role very well. It almost came naturally to him.
By the time David Jacobson arrived in Germany, a Beirut paper had leaked details of North's secret trip to Iran. There was even speculation that arms had been traded for hostages. Not that such questions mattered to David Jacobson in his moment of freedom.
I know you're just all eager to talk and to have questions for us to answer. I today wanted this to be my day of joy with my kids.
Terry Waite, aware that the revelations were both harmful to his reputation and the remaining hostages, warned against speculation.
Quite frankly, speculation, as far as I'm concerned, is so dangerous because it's putting further risk to the lives of hostages in the Lebanon. There are a lot of people trying to make political capital. There are a lot of people trying to sabotage honest and straightforward efforts. There are a lot of people muscling in on this whole thing for a variety of reasons best known to themselves.
3 weeks later, the arms for hostage scandal broke wide open when the administration revealed that profits from the arms sales had been diverted to the Contras. President Reagan had no alternative than to fire his most trusted aides.
Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North has been relieved of his duties on the National Security Council staff. I am deeply troubled that the implementation of a policy aimed at resolving a truly tragic situation in the Middle East has resulted in such controversy.
You still maintain you didn't make a mistake, Mr. President?
Hold it.
Did you make a mistake in sending arms to Tehran, sir?
No, and I'm not taking any more questions.
Oliver North's career was in tatters. But where did North's fall leave Terry Waite, who had worked so closely with the colonel from the White House? In being publicly associated with the hostage releases, how aware was Terry Waite that other factors besides his own efforts were leading to the hostages being freed?
I think, to a certain extent, he must have been aware because he knew himself to what extent he had made contact, what those discussions had been, and whether or not those discussions were responsible suddenly for a hostage turning up in Damascus or somewhere else. And in those cases, he was being inserted after the fact. So certainly he must have known.
Those who were closest to North's White House operations agree that Terry Waite knew he was turning up in the Middle East at North's direction. That's now acknowledged by Terry Waite's closest colleague in the United States. Colonel North would receive information from his Iranian contacts as to when a hostage was due to be freed, and it was his tips which guided Terry Waite's movements.
Oliver North would say, or Ollie would say, conditions look good at this time, that there's some very positive things happening. Obviously, we knew that he had access to information that the National Security Council has of the United States, being the president's personal staff and not an intelligence agency per se, that we didn't have. I would convey that information to Terry. Now, Terry maybe arranged to go to South Africa, which he was doing on several occasions. And he would revamp those and do a trip closer to the Middle East, whether it was Rome or somewhere else, where he would be in a closer position to be able to, if the information that comes from various sources tend to be out right, and it was appropriate for Terry to be president, he would go.
Terry Waite, of course, realized that the Americans were pursuing other options. What he has always denied is that he had any knowledge that they were trading arms for hostages.
As far as the disclosures about arms, I mean, I want to say quite clearly and quite categorically that I knew nothing about that. And in all my conversations with the hostage takers, the question of arms was never on my agenda. I never discussed it and never had any dealing with that. My job, standing as an independent negotiator in the middle, is to meet with a lot of people, but to be in control of my own agenda and to be able at the end of the day to look anybody in the eye and say my dealings were honest and honorable, and if other people have tried to use me or attempted to use me, that, I'm afraid, is their problem.
But Terry Waite felt his reputation had been tarnished. He told friends he could only re-establish his independence by taking the dangerous step of returning to Beirut.
Waite was clearly put at greater risk once the revelations of the Iran initiative were made public. Waite, I think, should have been advised by the U.S. government that, for better or for worse, he had played a role, unwitting though it may have been, in America's efforts to secure freedom for the hostages and sell arms to Iran.
Well, I think that what Terry wanted to do, one of the motivations that led him to return, was simply to establish the fact that he was and had been and always had been an independent negotiator. I spent several nights telling him not to do it. I was very concerned, and just for his safety. And I said, I really don't want you to go. And he said, I really must go.
Terry Waite arrived in Beirut, ignoring the advice of the British Foreign Office. They believed he had been dangerously compromised. But Terry Waite seemed driven by both a genuine commitment to the hostages and the need to show he could still operate without American backing. During his last trip, he held out hope of progress on the captor's main demand, the 17 prisoners in Kuwait, an impression he gave to Sheikh Fadlallah, the spiritual leader of one of the Shiite groups. As was revealed in his last telephone call, Terry Waite did have plans to go on to Kuwait.
Hello, Terry. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
During the conversation, which Canon Habibi recorded, Terry Waite urged his friends to go ahead and finalize the arrangements for his visit to Kuwait, something he believed the Kuwaitis had agreed to.
If we can do something on the other front, I think there is some enthusiasm. I'm moving immediately. I'm off tomorrow. Excellent. In the morning. I got the morning flight, and I should be there in the evening. Sunday I should be working on it. I hope to get through early in the week.
For Canon Habibi, it was to be the last contact with Terry Waite before he disappeared.
I have gentlemen at the same thing at home. Yes. Okay, now. Okay. Okay. Okay.
On January the 20th, 1987, at about 7 in the evening, Waite received an important message. He left the Riviera Hotel with his Druze bodyguards. Suddenly, after over a year, the captors apparently wanted to see him again, holding out the promise of a meeting with 2 of the American hostages. Ominously, while he was in Beirut, the Kuwaitis issued a statement saying they would make no concessions. The statement not only undermined his mission, but cast doubt on whether they really were going to receive him. In the end, Kuwait would hold on to the prisoners until Iraq invaded over 3 years later. In the fading light, they drove to the clinic of Dr. Adnan Mroueh. Terry Waite asked his guards to leave him. The doctor, suspiciously, was called away. When he returned 20 minutes later, Terry Waite had disappeared, one more Western hostage. The captors no longer saw him as a church envoy, but as a spy for America.
The Islamic Jihad interlocutors who he had dealt with obviously felt betrayed by him and felt a desire to demonstrate that they were not willing to be duped by someone. So when Waite unwisely returned to Beirut, having not been warned, having not been advised that it was a dangerous, reckless thing to do, he was punished by those whom had trusted him in the past.
Meanwhile, in Washington, North was revealing that lies had been one of his weapons in the hostage affair.
And you've admitted that you lied to the Congress, is that correct? I have. And you've admitted that you lied in creating false chronologies of these events, is that correct? That is true.
When I heard Oliver North say what he did, it caused me personal grief because I said to myself, well, that's not the Oliver North that I got to know. When Admiral Poindexter put it in a broader view, I felt a little bit more comfortable that I wasn't getting the whole truth. I had to ask myself, do you think he was lying to me, or
do you think he was lying to you?
I don't think he ever lied to us, no, because I don't think we were in a position where he would specifically give us an untruth.
But in not telling you the whole truth, do you think he exposed Terry Waite to danger?
That's a question that I have spent a lot of time thinking about, and to say that I did not, and to answer it sort of simplistically would not be fair to Terry or to Colonel North or to our relationship. Any relationship has its dangers.
Terry Waite, myself, others were all deceived, lied, and used by the U.S. government in its effort to achieve freedom for the hostages. You're quite right. Waite was duped. Waite was used. I don't believe he was aware of what North was doing surreptitiously with the covert arms sales to Iran or other actions that North was involved with. The end justified the means. People were taken advantage of, ruthlessly exploited, and when the operation fell apart, no effort was made by the U.S. government to come to the aid of those who had worked for it in one capacity or another. Everyone was left to fend for themselves, whether it was politically expedient or not. We were sacrificed on the altar of political expediency.
3 weeks before Terry Waite's release, Oliver North spoke for the first time about the Anglican envoy.
Do you yourself feel any guilt as regards how you dealt with him?
Guilt? I have a hard time with the use of the word.
Do you feel any responsibility about the fact that an envoy who you worked with ended up as a hostage?
I feel an incredible sadness that a man that I know personally, a man for whom I have enormous regard for his courage and his selflessness on behalf of his fellow man, has been for years chained to a dungeon in Beirut.
Do you feel any responsibility for that?
I would just as soon leave it at that.
Ladies and gentlemen, enough for the moment. Once again, my gratitude to you, my thanks to you, and I hope that I shall have the opportunity at a later date of speaking in greater detail and perhaps a little more personally. Thank you very much.
A week after his release, Terry Waite remains secluded from all the questions. In time, he has promised to give some of the answers. They will be eagerly awaited, particularly by Oliver North.
Funding for Frontline is provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. For videocassette information about this program, please call this toll-free number, 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS. Next time on Frontline,
This child died primarily of a fatal blow to the liver.
the life and death of Adam Mann.
You know, it's frustrating to see kids continue to be abused and nothing done about it.
Who killed Adam Mann?
For a printed transcript of this or any Frontline program, please write to this address,